So the Buddha said, I teach about one thing and one thing only. I teach about suffering and the end of suffering. He didn't teach a philosophy. He didn't even teach a religion. He didn't teach Buddhism. He said, I discovered freedom, and you can too. And his teachings point to what he found out. But we all have to find out what's true for ourselves. You have to find out what's true. I have to find out what's true. And the Buddha instructed us, be a light unto yourself. So I'd like to talk this morning about a difficult emotion that's a cause of suffering arising in all of us. And it's emotion that we have to learn to recognize when it arises. It's the emotion of shame. I'm a little bit hesitant to talk about shame because talking about it can bring it up. And the very last thing I want to do is to bring up suffering for you. So, right now, I'd like for us to stop and pick a corner of the room to put shame in, if it comes up, or a chair, or outside the window, even. But just choose right now um, someplace in your room right now. Okay, got it? Shame. So, a lot of us confuse shame and guilt. They're related, certainly, but they're very different emotions. And guilt is the feeling you get when you've done something wrong. Shame's a little more complicated. It's a feeling that your whole self is wrong. And it may not even be related to a specific behavior or an event. Shame always implies a negative self evaluation and a feeling of humiliation. Has to do with being seen, has to do with being judged harshly, just in any way by other people. But it doesn't have to do actually with others. It's something we do to ourselves. And often other people don't even have a clue why we would feel shamed about the thing that shames or haunts us. So our faces get hot, our shoulders pull in, maybe we can't get the words out, or we start stuttering even, or collapse. People can feel ashamed about their size, about their weight, about the color of their skin, and often some bodily experience or sexual preference or sex itself, or ashamed about not being smart enough or not living in the right place, or the mole on your cheek, or ashamed financially having less than others. I can't afford it. Or having more than others, privilege. There's shame about clothes. Or you can have shame around dancing or singing or any bodily function. People feel ashamed of their bodies functioning, normal, healthy body functioning. How incredible is that? Shame around aging. My goodness, how sad. Or maybe we get mad at ourselves because we have wants and needs. So different people have different areas and things that they're ashamed of. It comes a lot from comparing mind. And shame is a way of giving others authority over how we are. Like we're supposed to be different than we are. So sometimes we don't even realize it. I recently realized I'm ashamed of my own neediness, feeling helpless. So last Monday I wasn't here because I had surgery on both of my thumbs for arthritis. So don't have much use for my hands, kind of helpless. But caring people don't judge someone who needs help. I certainly don't judge other people who need help. So, where does shame around neediness come from? What a lack of compassion. When we can see the areas that we have shame around, we bring light to where we're lacking compassion. And this is good. This is helpful. And it's necessary for healing. So we practice in order to be free. And first of all, we have to see what's here. And then we bring wisdom and or compassion to it, preferably both. I've also had shame about wanting to feel loved. Wow, what an amazing thing to feel shame about. Isn't that human? It may even be what we're here for, to give and receive love. How sad it is to feel shame around it. What a lack of compassion. At one Dharma talk that I gave many years ago, I can't remember the talk at all, but I know it was self revealing. And afterwards, I felt this huge welling up of shame. I felt like I exposed myself too much. And I could feel it arise and feel the intolerability of it, the heat, and the humiliation. And I just felt way too vulnerable. I felt like my life was going to end. And I wanted to get out of the room as fast as possible. People came up to me afterwards, but nothing that anyone said could get through this filter of shame. So I walked out to my car and worked with this feeling. Because of practice, I did have the presence to watch it arise, to know that it was transient, it would pass, and I could ride it out, which I did. And it didn't last more than, 7 or 8 minutes, but it was a long, hard 7 or 8 minutes. And even now, some 30 odd years later, I can remember it. I remember it well, the shame that I felt. So other species feel shame too. It's not just humans. I raised dogs when my children were little. And one day I was preparing dinner and I had this roast that I put out on this tall countertop. And I heard one of my children crying in the other room. So I ran into the other room to handle whatever crisis it was. And then after it was over, I went back into the kitchen to finish making dinner. And the roast was gone. I was completely bewildered. Didn't know what happened. Where was it? And then I saw the dog who was in the corner of the room slinking with his head down, his tail between his legs in shame. And the dog had eaten the roast. But it definitely comes with the human territory. And it's actually, shame is better than not having any shame. Sociopaths have no shame. People who have no capacity for connection or empathy sociopathological arises, and it's a difficult place. Also, as human beings, we all have to learn to fail. And we have to be okay with failure because you start to try anything new or even say something to someone, and shame can come in and say, you're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not pretty enough. You're not talented enough. Who do you think you are? That's shame. It's also correlated with verbal abuse, with blaming, with criticizing. So instead of feeling the embarrassment and shame, say, of not being able to afford something for our children, it may lead us to yell at them because we haven't felt what's really true. And shame is connected to addiction, to violence, to eating disorders, to suicide, and to critical nature. Deeply connected to self-criticism. So the origins of shame can almost always be traced back to past experiences of feeling judged, criticized, or rejected. And the response to shame in people can be pushing away others, withdrawing, just working in any way to preserve their reputation by hiding the aspects of themselves they feel that will lead to rejection. The feeling of shame is not at all genderized. It makes no distinction. All people feel shame. But cultural expectations can cause the arising of shame, different in men and women. For women, the outrageous advertising for Enjoli perfume, all advertisements. There's one in particular from the 80s that set the bar so high, it made many women measure themselves against impossible standards. So an actress comes out who's absolutely gorgeous and sexy, and she says, I can put the wash on the line, feed the kids, get dressed, pass out the kisses, and get to work by 5 till 9, because I'm a woman. I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan, and never, ever let you forget you're a man, because I'm a woman. In Jolie, the 24-hour woman. We have to do it perfectly because I'm a woman. And they're unattainable expectations. Shame on you if you're not living up to this model. For men, it's culturally the perception of weakness. Lord help you if you're a vulnerable man. So thank goodness this is changing. Men are actually starting to allow themselves to be vulnerable. And women are starting to allow themselves to be human. What we're ashamed of needs secrecy and judgment to survive. When it's shared with someone with deep empathy, it doesn't survive. Brene Brown says shame derives its power from being unspeakable. So some clues to finding out if you have shame are, how do you handle a compliment? Does it land and feel nice? What do you say to yourself? Do you dodge it? Do you ignore it? And how do you handle it if you make a mistake? Do you shame yourself? What if somebody criticizes you? Do you go to something wrong with me? I'm a failure. I never get it right. Or do you have brain freeze? It can really take your life force energy. Shame and guilt can be lethal. I'd like to do a little reading now by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry from The Little Prince. "Why are you drinking?" asked the little prince. "So that I may forget," replied the tippler. "Forget what?" inquired the little prince, who was already sorry for him. "Forget that I am ashamed," the tippler confessed, hanging his head. "Ashamed of what?" asked the little prince, who wanted to help him. "Ashamed of drinking." So the Buddhist view is that there's a positive side to guilt and shame. When they lead to regret about having harmed self or others, we have to acknowledge what we've done so that it pierces our heart and we can see it clearly, and it leads us to go forward in a way that frees us from our habits. Also, shame illuminates self-view. There's a shame, pride, self-view continuum that we see ourselves as good or bad, seeing ourselves a certain way, judging ourselves or praising ourselves, very ungenerous and unkind. And we can also have shame about feeling shame. It's also easier to self-blame than it is to really acknowledge the unreliability of things. I've failed is easier to go to than the truth, which is absolute groundness, this groundlessness, and the certainty of not knowing. I made the wrong decision. I made the wrong decision. Who knew? How could you know? How could you possibly know? We're all guessing it, how things will turn out. And they don't turn out always the way we want them. And we have to have our open hearts to the unreliability of life. And we have to expose ourselves and take emotional risk. Exposure is actually an important piece to healing shame and to bringing us closer to people. It's necessary, particularly in close relationship. We have to learn to be humble, humiliated. We have to say I was wrong. We have to learn to fail. We have to lose in order to win. We have to lose everything. We have to lose our sense of self. And we lose it by seeing ourselves clearly and acutely on the deepest level. All of it, we have to let go of our egoic rigidity. Yes, they are set, they are rigid, but we can't shame them to death. Shinzen Young, one of my teachers, said, we love our egos to death. This is real compassion. And we even have to love our lack of compassion. Do whatever you can do to get out of the corner of the room. Carl Jung said, shame is a soul-eating emotion. And the way out is to bring wisdom, see it arising, see it walk out of the corner of the room, see ourselves walk into that corner, watch it pass. And two, compassion, do something kind. Bring a hand to your heart. May I be free of suffering. Take a break, call a friend. If you can't bring compassion, borrow compassion from your friend or from someone else. Borrow it from me. Yeah, we screw up. We make a mess, and we can start to clean it up and ask forgiveness and have remorse. Shantideva. May I become at all times, both now and forever, a protector of those without protection, a guide for those who have lost their way, a ship for those with oceans to cross, a bridge for those with rivers to cross, a lamp for those without light, and a place of refuge for those who lack shelter. For as long as space endures and as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world.